Inkjet Printing Masterclass, Lesson 5, Colour Inkjet Printing, Part 3, Ground Rules for Colour Printing. Now, for best consistency in critical colour tones, don't use high speed. That's the one rule that I would say is hard and fast. When you're changing from high speed to ordinary speed, you don't see too much difference between the print quality to the naked eye. But when you're using high speed, you can have effect on your production consistency. So if you want good consistency through a print run, best thing to do, don't set it to high speed, let it print on ordinary single direction printing, and you'll notice that your consistency will be much better. So at this stage, let me point out that it makes sense to make sure that your colour printer is up to date. If you're printing with an older colour printer but it still seems to be in good condition, it's probably a good idea to sort of sell that printer on and to get yourself the most modern printer. If you've got the last model of printer, I would say fine, that's it. But if you've got a printer that's maybe 2 or 3 models down the line, it's probably a good indication that it's a good time for you to change. If at the present time, which is summer of 2014, the current printer is the Epson R3000 that we show. Do we show here? No, we show here an R3880. Well, again, that's a current printer. But if you had the last printer, in this case it would be a 3800, again that's acceptable. But if you have one of the older printers, probably a good idea to change. So make sure your colour inkjet printer is up to date. It's up to the job. Make sure your inks that you use is the best choice, and that the inkjet papers that you're using is also up to the job. Now, I would refer you back to our lessons 1, 2 and 3 for in-depth coverage of those particular subjects. So set your budget sensibly and make sure you have your ground rules in place. Now, you have the best materials within your budget, you have the best equipment within your budget, best technique that you are able to achieve, and the best attitude that you can muster at the time. Now, the first 3 points are self-evident and obvious. But that last statement needs to have a little bit of explaining. The best attitude. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, this applies to both professional photographer, printing for profit, and also the enthusiast photographers out there printing for pleasure. We must never lose the reason that we started as print workers in the first place, which is the passion for achieving a fabulous print. This is a fabulous print. Never lose your passion for achieving really special, impressive prints. If ever you get to a stage where during a printing session you're simply going through the motions, you're not getting a feeling of satisfaction to your work, stop. You're probably tired, you need a break. Never try to complete a single print or an entire print run without achieving that sense of satisfaction of a job well done. I've lost count of the number of telephone calls I've received from customers who say they feel frustrated at a particular failure to achieve a particular outcome, and they've been struggling for days, even weeks, with the same problem. After a chat with me or one of my fellow ink or paper suppliers, they usually come up with a solution in a single conversation. And you have to ask yourself, why didn't they call us earlier? Now, the conclusion to all this is that you've got to make sure that your colour printing workflow is reliable and consistent and rewarding. This means a consistent, continuous stream of great colour prints. Remember what I mentioned earlier, for consistent ink flows, don't use high speed, and higher resolutions are best. If you're not achieving consistency, contact your supplier immediately until you get back to great, consistent printing. Colour printing to professional standards should be rewarding financially, but also spiritually. Capturing and preserving memories for future generations is good for the soul, after all. Now let's give you a case study to illustrate a point of where we upgrade for the just for the sake of it. Now, a common issue I get is when a print worker changes his computer operating system to the very latest version, making the printer driver, the editing software, and possibly more completely out of date. Sometimes updated printer drivers, image editing software, editing software, and even reprofiling doesn't solve the problem. I often advise that the user reverts back to what he had before, which is usually quite simple in computer systems. To regain the reliability of the system, you revert back. You should delay upgrading your operating system until such time as the changes to your computer are entirely worked out. Make sure that you don't adopt these upgrades until it's well proven for photographic applications, and you can usually find out this information on when you consult computer user groups, or when you consult the photographic trade journals. They usually warn you of any nasty things out there for things that don't quite work out, and also your camera clubs and your industry associates. The word soon gets out that particular issues haven't quite been worked out correctly. Now, our very great friend Mike Harvey Penton, who creates most of our stock images and publicity work, is a typical example of a traditional dyed-in-the-wool darkroom print worker who, in his own words, he experienced an epiphany a number of years ago. Never far away from his favourite Nikon, he trusted his darkroom work, won numerous awards and achieved good commercial portfolios of regular local clients. Once he could actually prove to himself that a digital colour print could pass muster, not just with himself but also his clients, he cautiously adapted to digital techniques in his own way. Now using a high-end Nikon digital SLR, staying with the brand OEM inks for his Epson 3800, he now uses Marriott Professional Photographic Inkjet paper to the exclusion of all others. He says that I now have 8 standard finishes available to me, which each represent the very best I can get in each category. I know exactly how my ink and paper work together, and I feel that I can control my images. Now, Mike still has his darkroom, but he's gradually turning it into a broom cupboard. He works instinctively in Photoshop. He uses his monitor as an indicator of general intent, but he applies most of his edits by remembering what has worked in the past. Now, we're going to get into this shortly. As a result, His work can be vibrant and striking or subtle and delicate. He feels that he is in control of the print. Part 4. Advice from an opinionated old print worker. Now that's me. This is me. From what I've just said, you must be starting to form an opinion of me as either a bit of a nutcase or possibly a kindred spirit. Let's hope it's the latter. Almost without exception, in my 30 years or more of working with photographers of all ages, abilities and reputations, the best print workers are those who work with passion, those who work hard, and those who have empathy with their clients and their subjects. Do you see the conflict that's starting to emerge in this presentation? On the one hand, I'm talking about printing for profit, but I've now introduced the concepts of passion, hard work and empathy. To be honest, that is the dilemma that I tell you to get good at printing. I'm telling you to use your natural talents, but to work hard, have empathy with your clients, make profit, enjoy yourself, and make it look easy. Now that just about covers it. You have to demand a lot from yourself. You have to set your standards high and make sure your efforts reward you either financially if you're a professional or spiritually if you're an enthusiast. Now the title of this section is Advice from an Opinionated Old Print Worker. Now let's give you one of my favourite contentious pieces of wisdom, which you're quite at liberty to ignore completely. Now the title of this section, Monitor Assisted Murder of a Good Image. In my early career as a Merchant Navy radio officer, I was taught about a radar-assisted collision, which has actually happened on a number of tragic occasions. When the head-up display is incorrectly set up on a radar, ships approaching slightly to port on the left can actually appear on the radar to be approaching slightly to starboard, which is on the right. Incorrect avoiding action then sets up a train of events which, unless you actually look out of the bridge of your ship to check what is actually happening, you collide with the oncoming ship. There have been a number of tragedies at sea because of this, some even in completely clear visibility. I show you here a tragic actual example of this. The ocean liners Stockholm and the Andrea Doria colliding with great loss of life. I believe the Andrea Doria lost over 50 people. Now my point here is that a slavish adherence to your monitor screen can lead you into danger. A repeating theme from this presentation will be that you should not trust your monitor too much. Imagine if your monitor is incorrectly set up. Let's say it's displaying an excess of magenta, a reddishness. You will be guided by your screen to correct the magenta bias, usually by taking out the magenta, which has the effect of putting green into your image data. And it looks on screen quite neutral and correct. But the reality is that you've put green into the image. Now, without the knowledge that your monitor is in fact too magenta, you come to the conclusion that your printer is incorrect and it is simply printing too green. But it gets worse than this. Now, virtually every single monitor out there, whether it's a CRT, whether it's a liquid crystal display or whatever, is not as sensitive to tiny changes as your inkjet printer in colour or density or curves or levels or anything really. Any of these fine adjustments, very, very fine adjustments, hardly show up on screen. Now try this test to see if I'm right. Get your favourite test image and print small quarter-page test prints, first unadjusted, then apply tiny changes in one value only, maybe brightness or colour saturation or levels. Put these prints side by side, marking up each print with the adjustment applied. While this is going on, look at your monitor. Does each 1 or 2% adjustment give you any visual change on screen? No, I thought not. But when you look at your test prints side by side in a good light, yes, you can detect subtle changes each print to the next. This lesson was given to me by Faye Godwin, one of our finest darkroom and latterly digital print workers, who sadly is no longer with us. What made her lessons even more striking and memorable for me was that she was able to see subtlety in her colour prints easily beyond my own visual ability. And at the time, I was around half of her age. An amazing lesson I will never forget. Now, what can we do about this? If you want to colour and black and white print to a super high-end level, you must start to accept and understand the limitations of your equipment. A modern photographic inkjet printer, properly looked after and recently custom profiled, is one of the most accurate colour devices you can have. A modern high-end digital SLR, properly looked after and properly set up, is also one of the most accurate colour devices you can have. Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom or similar is a very, very powerful and efficient method of ruining great images if used without a reliable visual reference. Most modern monitors, even if calibrated with an on-screen calibrator, fail to deliver a sufficiently fine level of visual reference to extremely small, subtle changes in colour, density, curves, levels, for instance. Monitor colour response curves are often quite different to print colour response curves, and compare transmitted light, which is the monitor, with reflected light, which is the print. And finally, a monitor gives you 72 dots per inch, and a high-end inkjet print can render anything up to 5,760 dots per inch. Just be aware how intrinsically different and sometimes misleading even good quality monitors can be. So how do we achieve a reliable visual reference if, as I say, our monitors are not up to the job? Faye Godwin taught me to trust the monitor when performing coarse adjustments. That when it comes down to fine adjustment, educate yourself with an understanding of how a typical fine adjustment affects your prints. And when applying an adjustment of say 6%, try halving this to only 3% and see what your test print gives you. Initially perform many test prints to see how the more subtle adjustments affect your print. Then gradually you should become more attuned to how your system responds to fine, subtle adjustment, until finally you're working entirely on screen but applying fine changes that are not seen on screen, but you know instinctively the effect it will have on your finished print. So if I've made myself clear, to start with, you learn about fine adjustment by producing lots and lots of little test prints, and you can actually see the subtlety of what you're doing. And then as you get more and more confidence, you no longer need to produce these test prints. You actually get the feel that you can apply a subtle change, knowing that although you don't see any on screen, you know that those subtle changes will be appearing at your print, and you're going to be using your memory to remember that a particular adjustment will give you a particular effect. Now, in our example here, the client was consulted to approve exactly the subtle flesh tone required whilst holding the strong dominant colour of the lips. This is obviously an advertising shoot, and the most important element of this image here is obviously these strong lips. It's probably a cosmetics advert. The client was shown a series of test prints, each marked up with a specific subtle adjustment used to create each test print. In this way, we're bringing the client into an extremely fine image adjustment decision, ensuring that our production prints are right first time because the client has decided which one to go for, in the opinion of the one person here who actually matters, which of course is the client. Now, any last words of wisdom on this particular subject? Well, yes, as it happens. Get into the habit of criticising your work harder than any of your customers would. Try to create prints to a standard comfortably above your most critical customer would accept. This could mean, though, that your particular customers demand a low-cost product with a fairly average print quality. Be guided by your own clients. Don't give them more than they want or they're prepared to pay for. But if your clients are discerning, they're looking for quality and they're prepared to pay for it, give them the best. Imagine that these picture frames in this gallery contain your work. How would you feel if you knew that they represented not quite the best that you're capable of? For an enthusiast, the same applies. Picture the most critical acquaintance that you have. Try to set your standards above his or her expectation. Now, I know this won't be easy, but hopefully this next section will help you to set your own required standard of imaging. I have extremely successful customers whose clients have fairly low image quality standards, but extremely high production volumes. I also have customers whose clients are unbelievably critical to the point of obsession, extremely picky about even the most minor aspects of their images. Now, where are you between these two extremes? What do you want from your colour prints? This is section 5 of this lesson. What do you want from your colour prints? Now, I'm indebted to my old friend Tony Riley, who first introduced me to an entirely new acronym for an image file standard. We all know that JPEG, TIFF and a PSD file is. We all know what these are. And we use these words in everyday digital printing language. But the following acronyms are totally made up, but they nicely describe various quality levels when image editing files in Photoshop or Lightroom. JGWI, JGE, FGSS, KGCP. What do they mean? We'd like to pull that across there. There we go, thank you very much. Lovely. Let's show you what we've got. So, let's explain. Here we are. Just go with it. Used when time really is tight on a job. Try printing a job as is, unedited and uncropped. Print straight from your shots, taken straight from your digital SLR. Sometimes not so good, but if you've taken care to accurately frame, compose and correctly light and expose your job, you may be surprised how clean and crisp your prints actually turn out, without your usual repertoire of favourite Photoshop adjustments and tricks. Just go with it. So you take your work straight from the camera, get it into Photoshop, hand it straight over to your custom profile printer and just go with it. Just see what it produces. You'll often be very surprised at the result. It can be very, very acceptable. Our next acronym, which is Tony's favourite. Why edit your images in Photoshop to an unbelievably high standard when, let's say, you're only using the shot on a web page or as a thumbnail on a printed page? You've got to remember to allocate the correct amount of image editing time to your image proportionate to the end quality required, or actually what your customer actually requires. So JGE is just good enough. If you're doing lots and lots of work for web pages, why are you spending so much time in Photoshop? Often just a contrast level, bump up the levels, maybe an auto levels, maybe something like that is all that's needed to give you a nice punchy shot that will be reproduced at a tiny little size. So JGE, just good enough. The next acronym, for God's sake, stop. How about that? You've got to know when to call a halt to your Photoshop editing time per shot. Can you really afford the time to select out portions of the image for in-depth changes? Can you afford the time to dodge and burn each image in a production job? The common question here is, can you afford the time? Ask yourself this question whenever you're setting a time schedule to complete a particular job. Has the client paid for the amount of editing time that you're about to commit to? If through no fault of your own, the job has turned out into a nightmare of corrections, edits and repairs, you may need to get back to your client and get permission for extra editing charges to ensure that the finished production job is up to standard. The flip side of this argument is that if the problems are entirely your own fault, you've got to suck it up, commit to the extra editing time for the sake of a job well done, and write it down to experience. That's what makes you a professional. Their last acronym is KGCP. Keep going, the client is paying. How terrible is that? Now, this is not quite as cynical as you would think. This acronym actually means that you should give your client what he wants. If he's willing to cover your image editing time, by all means, strive to achieve every element of your client's brief. But remember the other side to this. If your client ain't paying, don't give it to him. Notwithstanding what I've said earlier about when a job goes wrong, these 4 acronyms mainly apply to paying work, but enthusiasts may also use these abbreviations to remember to trim their Photoshop editing time according to the pleasure and satisfaction gained in each image that they work on. These are very handy abbreviations for us all. My conclusion here is that Photoshop editing is one of those things in life where you can usually say most of the time less is more.